Hello, we are in our final video for the 31-day flower challenge, if you were part of that. If you weren't part of our March 2022 challenge and you're just here to paint this beautiful flower, welcome. The flower we're painting today is one that is, I don't know why I choose the hardest flowers to pronounce, but Nasturtiums, I believe is how you pronounce it. We're gonna be painting them today. I love these flowers. This is a picture I took from our garden. They're super easy to grow and they're also edible. At least the ones that I planted are, so don't go around eating them. Make sure you buy the ones that are edible, but they're pet safe. So that was one of the reasons I planted them in our garden. So we're gonna go ahead and paint these today. So grab your pencil. I have my watercolor paper taped down today because I'm not working on a watercolor block. So if you're not working on a watercolor block, make sure to tape down your paper. We're just gonna start up here with this bloom that's towards the top. I'm just making these petals like a circle, but then make the little edges that the petals kind of fold over in. I've been told that I make the drawing part look really easy, so I'm sorry. I'm not a good teacher when it comes to drawing because drawing is so it would just take a lot of time if I had to really get in depth about it. So I'll try to explain it the best way I can. Essentially the leaves are round, but we're making these kind of little indentations to show where the petal kind of folds and there's some veins in it. I'm gonna petal back here. And then I'm just going, there's like this hole in the center that I just wanna make sure we keep. And it has like these little fuzzies in here, but we'll just remember that when we get in there. Then we have another one over here. And we're gonna let them touch a little bit. And it looks like they have 5 petals, but I would say this top one almost looks like it has 6, but I could be wrong. But as you can see, there's a lot of shadows. So we're gonna be sure to really showcase those shadows because that will look really cool. And we're not gonna draw all the flowers. So let's do one more. Let's do this one on the right-hand side. It's a little bit more open. I'm gonna put it a little further down here. It almost is similar to how a pansy has those 2 petals on top. And then these ones coming out. And this one kind of folds over itself. And what I like to tell you guys is if you are not comfortable with drawing, but you really want to paint this to look realistic, obviously practice drawing. You'll get better the more that you practice. But if you're just really hating that part, but really want to paint something that looks realistic, just trace it. It's totally fine. Nobody's judging you. It's totally fine to trace it if you need to. Now there's a big leaf back here, so I want to be sure to grab that leaf. And then there's also some stems that are coming down here. The back side of the Nasturtiums are really interesting. They almost have this little like hook. It's interesting. I've never seen a flower like that. And then the leaves are almost like lily pads. So really circular in nature. We're kind of just gonna make up, like it doesn't have to follow the picture perfectly, but just make some of those round lily pad like leaves, maybe one that kind of folds in on itself. Okay, maybe we'll do one kind of coming out like this. And they all have this circle in the middle. And all the veins kind of go out from there. So we'll make sure to accentuate that when we start painting. I'm gonna make one more leaf up here. Maybe this one folds over a little bit. and we're looking a little unbalanced. So I'm gonna put a flower over here that's kind of, it's the side of the flower. Feel free, if you're okay with the way it looks, you can leave it that way. No pressure. And maybe one more leaf kind of coming in here. Maybe just a little leaf up here. Okay, so we have our basic layout, and we are going to be working more in a layered format today. So this is gonna be one of those longer tutorials. So mix up some yellow. These nasturtiums are actually called Fiesta because they're so bright. There's also ones called butterscotch that are really, really, really pretty. And we don't have to make these all yellow, orange. We could make them like a little more red, or, I mean, you could make them any color you want. So we're just putting down our base layer. So when we put down our base layer, we have a pretty light wash on our brush, and we're just painting over the petals. Now, I know I say this all the time, but the pencil marks are pretty dark on my painting. You definitely want them to be a little lighter. So make sure when you sketch lightly. I didn't mention it because if you've watched any of my other videos, I always tell you to sketch lightly, but I sketch dark so that you guys can see what I'm painting or what I'm drawing. So this one we did pretty yellow, so let's add a little more orange when we do this one. My pencil lines are definitely going to be showing through, but that's okay. I don't normally like them to show through, but for teaching purposes, it's okay. So we're just getting the base layer down here. And if you guys have painted more realistic style with me in the past, you know that we're going to have to let this dry in between. Otherwise, it'll all kind of bleed together, and we don't want that because that's not the look we're going for today. So just putting that base wash down. Maybe I'm gonna add a little red to this one over here. Getting my paint everywhere. These flowers are so cool. I see them, I just went on a hike, a coastal hike, and a bunch of them were growing just wild. It's really cool. I mean, I'm sure somebody probably planted them, but they were growing really well. They're great drought tolerant plants too. I guess you can make a pesto with their leaves, the edible ones. Okay. So we have our flowers down, and I'm just gonna come in, and as you can see from the photo, there's some little red specks closer to the center. I'm just going to get some of that color and kind of just tap it in. Maybe add a little more orange. This one down here, maybe get a little more red. And this one, because it's a side view, just really light in here. Okay. Since this is all wet, we don't want it to bleed, so we can't go over here and start painting because all of these are touching. So we're gonna have to let this dry. So either let it dry naturally, you'll know it's dry when it's dry to the touch, but also when it loses its shimmer, so it should be pretty matte. Or you could grab a blow dryer. So whatever you need to do that, and then I'll meet you back here for the next layer. All right, now we're coming into these leaves, and they're kind of a bright green, like lily pad color. So grab a green with significant amount of yellow in it. Just mixing it up here. That green that I'm grabbing is kind of blue, a little too blue. If you have that happening, just grab a little bit of red. It'll kind of mellow it out a little bit. Okay. Now I'm just gonna come in here and I'm actually going to paint the base layer all the same color green for right now. I'm not gonna worry too much. Obviously, this leaf would be darker because it's underneath this leaf, but we can address that in the future. Has anybody watching, were you part of the 31-day flower challenge in March? If you were, how did you like it? What was your favorite flower? What was your least favorite flower? I will say that it was extremely challenging for me. I loved it. It was nice to stick with something for an entire day. Oh, just so you guys know, the technique I'm using here is I'm just painting with a wash. Now, you don't want your brush to be dripping with paint, but it should have a nice wash and you should be able to do some strokes without it drying out. And then I also add just a little more water to move it around because it's the bottom layer is a wash. But like I was saying, if you are doing the challenge that we did in March 2022, it was really challenging for me because I typically paint in a more realistic style. So it takes me a long time. So I'm, needing to spend 2 to 3 hours on a painting every day and with my normal workload. And it was challenging. But it was good to stick with something. I really enjoyed seeing everybody participate and just seeing you guys stick with something. That's incredible, and you all should be so proud of yourselves. And if you're here just because you wanted to learn how to paint nasturtiums and you're like, what are you talking about? Don't worry, I won't talk about it much more. We did a challenge on Instagram in March and it was really cool. I'll definitely be hosting more challenges if you guys are into that kind of thing. It's just a fun way to kind of be held accountable to staying with your watercolor practice. But you can follow me on Instagram, Lavender and C. People spell lavender wrong a lot, so just make sure you're spelling it right. And I have a corgi, so if you see corgi pictures on there, you know it's me. Okay. So just painting these, make sure we get those stems. On here. Like that, like so. Maybe we add a little more yellow for this one down here. Ooh, that was really yellow. We can kind of mix it in to the other leaves. Such cute little flowers. I love their leaves. They really do look like lily pads. And if you want to come in, so the green is all still wet. If you want to come in and add a little pizzazz in a couple areas, maybe you add like a little darker green where there might be a shadow like down here. But we're going to go in and add a lot of details, so don't feel like you have to do this. I just like to do this because I think it can create some neat texture when it dries. And we are going to have to wait for this to dry before we can go back. I know that's probably irritating for some people, but this is watercolor. When you're wanting it to look more realistic, you have to let those layers dry. It really is the key. It upped my watercolor game as soon as I learned about that. I remember a watercolor artist that I really looked up to. I asked her for a tip and she said, layering is the tip. And she goes, you really have to wait until the layer is completely dry. And once I started applying that rule that she gave me, I watched my watercolor go from just to really, in my eyes, amazing. I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying that like it changed the way I painted. Okay, we're gonna let this dry and then we'll come back. We are back, nice and dry. We're gonna start working on our flowers. So going back to our mixture of the yellow and the orange, probably gonna grab a smaller brush just because my size 6 is really, it's getting pretty old. So the tip is not as sharp. So I'm gonna go down to a size 2 brush. And I'm going to come in here and I have a good amount of paint on my brush and I'm kind of just making an outline right here. Essentially where the shadow would go. Then I'm rinsing off my brush and coming back and just moving around that paint. Now I would like it to be a little more yellow and bright, so I'm just adding in some pigment, rinsing off my brush, and moving that around. Now I'm not going to touch this petal or this petal because we don't want it to bleed. So I'm gonna move on to this one. This one definitely has more orange in it. I'm just painting pigment in this bottom section, rinsing off my brush, grabbing only water. Now the water is not dripping off my brush. It's just nice and wet. And I'm basically going to paint water here so it kind of bleeds into this nice kind of ombre. I do want a little more yellow, so I'm gonna pop in a little more yellow here. Then we're just gonna do the same thing over here. We're just kind of painting along that bottom edge with our pigment, rinsing off our brush, grabbing clean water, and letting it kind of just flow. Grabbing a little more yellow, make it brighter. Okay, so we can't really touch anything else at this point. Something we could do is grabbing, so you can see in the center of the flower, there's almost this, I wanna say brown color. There is some white, but we're gonna add that with a gouache later. So I'm grabbing a brown and I'm just lightly tapping it. It will bleed a little bit. That's normal. Because it's only, it seems like at the upper section of the flower. Rinsing off my brush and then just with water, kind of blending it into that center area. And we can add in those little red lines later. But for now, I just wanted to establish that there's a little bit of darkness there. All right, now we're gonna move on and do that same technique for all of these other flowers. I'm gonna leave this in real time for you guys just because I know that you're probably painting along with me, and I know in the past people have expressed that they would like it just to stay at the normal speed. But since I showed you the technique, I'm not gonna be telling you every single petal here because we're gonna be using the same technique that I used for these petals. Feel free if you want to add in more red, more yellow, whatever works for you. And again, we do not want to touch petals that are already wet because we don't want them to bleed. And I actually should have done this petal because then I would have been Oh, actually no, because there's only 5. That's okay. So moving on to our next petals. And feel free if you guys, you can take a snapshot of the picture that I'm referencing at the beginning of the tutorial. That way you have it for a frame of reference, or you could totally work off of your own too. If you have a painting that you'd like to work, or sorry, a picture that you would like to work off of. And we could actually do this one underneath because there's a little fold over of the petal. So it technically is not touching right here. Oops. And I say this in all my videos, but I like to keep a water for the warm tones and a water for the cool tones. It really makes sure that my paints stay vibrant and that they don't get all murky. Moving on to this guy over here. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna grab my brown again, just for the same little area. It's okay if it bleeds a little bit. Just blending in here. And we can paint this guy. I'm gonna change up the color tone just a bit. It's just laying down the pigment and then rinsing our brush off, grabbing just water, and just blending it in. Add a little yellow, more yellow. My yellow has turned into a yellow-green kind of. Okay, so now this is basically dry up here, so we can go back up here and paint the leaves that we're touching originally. Now this leaf should be, or sorry, petal should be slightly lighter because it's on top of this one. So it wouldn't have that shadow like the other one is going to have. So I'm just keeping it kind of light. A little bit of this. Make sure the other ones are dry. So for this one, I'm gonna make it slightly darker because it's underneath these two. Now when you make it darker, it needs to be the same color tone. So it wouldn't be, like I don't wanna make it like bright pink or neon red or something like that because it needs to match. Otherwise it's not gonna look realistic. So I will come back later and put some darker shadows with maybe a little bit of gray to really showcase that it is underneath the other petal. And these are not quite dry yet. So let's move on to some of our leaves. So the leaf that is not really touching anything is this one. I mean, it's touching that, but barely. So we can work on this. And for the leaves, we just want to add another layer of green just to make them look a little more interesting. And we're going to use that same technique where we just kind of outline it and then rinse off our brush, have just clean water, and kind of use a swishing circular motion to kind of bring it all the way around. So you want to think about it in terms of lighting. The lighting, let's say it's coming in from this side, so then this would be a darker shadow here. You could really make that even like a lot darker if you want to. And then maybe make some green over here. We're not going to spend too much time on the leaves today. We could spend, I'm not joking, a painting like this can take me 5 hours sometimes, and we're not going to spend 5 hours today because I'm sure you didn't sign up for a 5-hour tutorial. So we're gonna kind of keep it simple with the leaves. But as you can see, from this to this, there's a lot more interest because we have the darker value, mid-tone, and lighter. Let's just go around, and any leaves, we could go ahead and do this one here. This one would obviously be darker right here where the petal is coming down. So that's why I'm starting the paint there. I'm gonna add a little bit. Actually pop in a little darker color. Rinse off my brush. Grab just water, using that kind of circular toothbrushing motion. And I would say that maybe there would be some shadow over here, maybe down here. Then I just let the watercolor do its thing. Kind of just bleeds. Gonna grab just a little bit of yellow, like I did for the other one. And because the watercolor paper is wet and the paint is wet, you'll get a really cool bleeding of the paints. We could go ahead and do this one too. If your green is looking too neon, you can add in a little bit of brown or red to mute it. Adding in where those shadows would be. And I'm rinsing off my brush, getting just water. And scrubbing along. Watercolor is really about exploring. I'm a big believer that you don't need to follow the rules in art. Obviously, there's some things like you have to use water when you're using watercolor paint. But as far as the techniques, there's a lot of people that use a lot of different techniques. And that's the fun of art, is just to explore. So you can, watch me and I can tell you the things that I do, but figure out what works for you. I'm gonna paint this leaf next. I have to mix up a little more green. I encourage you guys to put on some music in the background. It's really hard to get music on here because of royalties, and no offense, but I'm not gonna pay $1,000 for a piece of music for a free YouTube video. I wish that there was options for music, but there's just really not. But put on your own music, you'll like it more. So just come in here, this, again, we'd have a shadow right here. Technically, we'd probably have another shadow, but I'm gonna say that this leaf is on the bottom. And we'll make it another kind of shadow there with some gray once everything is dry. I'm gonna paint this in the middle. And be sure that you paint around your stem, because you want the stem to pop out. And this brush, the tip is just not that good. So it's getting difficult. Sorry if the painting just got a little dark. It's a cloudy day outside, so the clouds are coming in and out and it's taking the sunlight with it. Adding in some yellow. I love how bright these are. And be careful, because I know I should have painted here going down, but I was waiting for this to dry. But we can paint up here now. And we want to separate these two leaves. So this one's going to be brighter. Just painting along the edges. And then rinsing off my brush. The leaf folds over here, but we'll address that a little later. Ooh, that's really dark. So if you ever like make a mistake like that, just rinse off your brush and then dry it off on a paper towel, and you can literally come in and just pick up that pigment. And just continue rinsing your brush, drying it, and then pulling up the paint. It's pretty cool. Okay. Almost looks like clovers. All right, I am going to run a dryer over this really quick, and then we will paint the rest. Okay, we are back. We're gonna get back into these flowers and start adding just a little more detail here. So there would be a tiny shadow here where it kind of folds over itself. There would be a shadow here. So what I'm gonna do is that same kind of orangey color, I'm just going to add a little bit of black to it. So it kind of gets a little more muted. And then I'm just making that little shadow. Same thing over here. And then something else I wanted to do is, you can see in the original photo that there's these red lines that come out of here. So I'm just gonna make those too. That's that Fiesta color. Bright orange and yellow. And maybe just like a little bit of orange. Little shadow down here. You have to be careful with adding the black because you don't want it to look really out of place. If you squint your eyes and look at your picture, you can tell that it's never really black, right? It's more of like a dark red or a more muted red. And then there's also these little, I don't know how to explain them, like furry little hairs. I don't know. But those are in here, so I'm just lightly kind of making those in there. And then there are also these lines, like veins in the flower. There's a lot going on in this flower. So grabbing orangey red making those flower veins. So it all depends on how realistic you want it to look. If you're like, I liked it better before that, then just take your brush. If it's still wet, you can get rid of these. And we have to paint the other petals here because we didn't actually paint them. This color is looking really muted, so I'm gonna grab some bright yellow in here. We're just using that same technique to paint. So pretty. Love the colors. Maybe I want to add a little more red in here. It's definitely spring right now. There's so many pretty flowers. It's really cool too to see like how many flowers there are. It's like crazy. There's so many. I'm kind of working a little bit faster now because I want to finish this. There we go. So we have a lot of wet paint, so we have to be mindful of that because we can't just like go in and make all these small details because that's not how it works. It'll all bleed and we don't want it to do that. So we've got to wait, but we could add in that brown, and it's okay if the brown bleeds a little bit. Just in here. Okay with that? Same thing over here. And then maybe this where the petal kind of folds over, adding a little shadow. And something we can do is bring some life to these stems. I would grab a slightly darker green than that leaf, and I'm just making a little line. So like a shadow line. You could even grab some water and blend it in a little bit if you want. Same thing over here. And we can go ahead and paint this other leaf up here. That leaf is definitely going to be darker, but we need to be mindful that we're not touching that. It shouldn't, if the petals are wet, don't touch it, otherwise it's gonna be a disaster. So I'm just painting. I'm really accentuating this shadow right here. Like, that's pretty dark. And I can always lighten up with some water if I want to, kind of blend it in, if you feel like it's too dark. Just keeping that shadow going over here. And just making sure this leaf is darker than the one on top. There we go. Just adding some shadows. Sorry, I'm not explaining what I'm doing. I'm just adding in some shadows here for this. And I'm gonna run the blow dryer over this one more time and we're gonna put our finishing touches. So we are going to add color to this last one. We're gonna definitely make this one lighter because it's on top. Make sure we don't paint that stem. Okay. I'm gonna go in and add veins to the flower petals. So grabbing an orangey red, a yellow orange color, and just lightly making those veins. And I suggest kind of alternating. Maybe some are more yellow, maybe some are more red. You don't want them all to look exactly the same. And there are those kind of red lines coming up here. So I'm gonna put those in. Oh, that was way too thick. So I'm just gonna use a clean brush to get that out of there. Gonna put in a little shadow right here. Maybe a shadow over here. Definitely recommend using like a small, this is a size 0. If you have something smaller like a 0.18, feel free to use it. And then we are going to need those same little red lines over here. And a little shadow here. Also a shadow here. Also a shadow here. And actually I'm gonna do just a little more shadow over here. Could spend all day on this. Okay, now we are going to go into the leaves, and I am going to pull out, where is it? This bleed proof white. I love this, but if you have a white gouache or even acrylic would be just fine. If you use white watercolor paint, most likely it's not going to show up. So that's why I love this stuff so much. But this is not waterproof. So if you add water to it and move it around, it's gonna get all over the place. So the leaves, they have this little circle in the middle, and then they kind of just come out like this. So the veins come out from the center. And maybe like some of them are a little lighter. You don't have to do all of them. You just want to do some. But they definitely have light veins. Another way you can do this, but it's a lot more complicated, is you can paint that base layer really, really light, and then you can use masking fluid to cover it up. So they wouldn't be white, they would be that really light green color because you're gonna use a dark paint all over it. But that's a lesson for another day. I'm even adding just a couple little, they have these little like pollen inside. Technically they're more yellow than white, but I thought it would be kind of cute to add the white. There's also even some like tiny little lines in here. Like I said, I could put the details in this all day long. So just having those really light lily pad like veins in the leaf. And our last one down here, can you believe it? Thanks for sticking with me, you guys, through all of this. If you did, let me know how you like this tutorial. I hope it was helpful for you to paint a nasturtium, if that's how we pronounce it. All right, we are all done. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I hope you guys loved it. Please tag me on Instagram and show me your artwork, Lavender and Sea. I love to see what you guys create. Thanks for watching. I hope you have an amazing day.